Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome back. It's Friendly Neighborhood Spencer Man on July 20th here in Abbotsford. Office is looking mighty sparse. Next week, actually, we're just going to be sitting at my dining room table because it'll be one of the few things that hasn't been packed. We move next Thursday, so we're paring down. We're getting to the bare bones of this operation, and then we move, and we'll slowly over time set up an actual office and studio and get these things looking a little better and things like that. But for now, we are back with one question for every fight for UFC London. The second trip to London this year. Everything went so well in March, the UFC decided to go back again this weekend. A lot of the same players, a lot of the same fighters. More questions to be answered, though. So let's dive right in. Main event is Curtis Blaydes versus Tom Aspinall. Tom obviously headlined the last show against Alexander Volkov. My question is one that I ask pretty regularly about emerging talents, ascending talents as they continue to work their way up the ladder. And that is, how good is Tom Aspinall? Clearly, we don't know yet. There hasn't been a ceiling set. He's never seen the end of the second round in his career. He's 5-0 in the UFC with 5 finishes. He has 4 straight bonuses. We thought Alexander Volkov was going to be a quality test. He proved that to not be the case as he went out and steamrolled him, ran through him. Thus far, he's really cruised. He hasn't really been tested, right? He's been to the second round once. That's against Andrei Arlovsky. Got that one done pretty quickly. Curtis Blaydes is a very different beast, though. Curtis Blaydes is a guy that came in as a wrestler with very raw skills. He has now refined his game to the point that I would say he's a very complete mixed martial artist, a very well-rounded mixed martial artist. We saw that last time out. His fight in March as well against Chris Daukaus, goes out, knocks him out 17 seconds into the second round, 0 takedowns, just the third time in his career he won a fight without securing a takedown. One of those, he had a bunch of control time against Daniel Omilanchik. So the other only one was the Junior Dos Santos fight. This is one of those fights that's going to tell us right now whether Tom Aspinall is a contender and deserves to be in that top 5 mix, or he still needs a little bit of time to get there. I think eventually he's going to get there, but it might be that he's there now. The reason I say that this is the fight that'll decide it is because we know Curtis Blaydes is there, right? His losses in the UFC, his losses in his career for that matter. Twice to Francis Ngannou, once to Derek Lewis in a fight where he's dominating in the first round with his striking, telegraphs a takedown attempt from too far out without any setup, and just absolutely eats one. And when you eat one against Derek Lewis or anybody really in the heavyweight division, as clean as that shot landed, you're out. He's rebounded nicely since. As I said, the Daukaus win, the Jairzinho Rosenstrike win prior to that. He's a guy that will test Tom Aspinall, or at least we think he will. I think he will. The potential is there for him too. And it will be the thing that lets us know kind of where Tom's at. Can he deal with Curtis Blaydes' pressure? Can he deal with his wrestling? Can he deal with his power? Will this be a fight where Aspinall has to be defensive for the first time in a while? Will Curtis Blaydes be the one kind of dictating the terms of engagement? So far, it has largely been Tom in control of all of these fights, the one setting the tempo, the one setting the pace and dictating everything. What happens when that shifts? What happens if Curtis Blaydes just looks to wrestle for 2 rounds to drain some of the gas tank and just see what Tom Aspinall looks like in rounds 3, 4, and 5 if we get there? Very interesting fight, very important fight for both guys. Super looking forward to it. Think this will be a really entertaining fight on Saturday to close things out. Cannot wait to see what happens. Co-main event, Jack Hermansson versus Chris Curtis was originally going to be Darren Till. Darren Till suffers an injury, gets replaced by the Action Man. And my question is, how great is the Chris Curtis story, right? Sean Sheehan always gives me credit as like, you should follow me. Chris Curtis is the reason you should follow me, or guys like Chris Curtis are the reason you should follow me, because I was writing about Chris when he came into the UFC before that first fight, because his story then even was great, raising his hand to fight Phil Hawes on 24 hours notice, eventually getting the fight at MSG and getting the win, kicking off this streak that he's on now. But it goes deeper than that. He has 4 wins in the last 12 months. This is his 5th fight in that span this weekend. He has the opportunity to go from outside of the UFC to in the top 10 in the span of 12 months. Now, we've seen that happen before, right? In shallow divisions and with, kind of fighters that are in their prime or really great prospects that come along and just sort of rocket into existence. This is a guy that's a little bit older, has had a ton of experience. Nobody would have projected this. Even me, as somebody that was really interested in his story and really thought that Chris deserved a spot coming off his win in the Contender Series way back when. I wouldn't have said top 10 guy even 2 years ago or a year ago when we were starting to have these conversations about Chris Curtis. And yet here he is. If he goes out and beats Jack Hermanson and picks up a 4th straight win in the UFC and a 2nd win this year, he's a top 10 fighter. And that's wild given where he was, given that he's retired 3 times, given that he's thought about walking away all of these different times to come back and put together a really impressive string of victories. I was critical of the performance against Rodolfo Vieira. My co-host on the Next Day Takeaways, Harry Powell, did a very good job of articulating why it wasn't a disappointing performance, but it was showcasing and focusing on some very different things. Regardless of where you stand or fall on that performance, it's still a win. It's 3 straight in the UFC. If he goes and gets 4 this weekend, the story just keeps growing. The legend just keeps growing. The story of Chris Curtis continues to be that fairy tale story, and we see what the next chapter brings after that. 3rd fight on the main card, I think you could safely call this one the people's main event. Paddy Pimblett against Jordan Levitt. And my question is, when does Paddy truly get tested? I say that with no disrespect to Jordan Levitt, who I think is an intriguing emerging fighter, kind of an intriguing, inexperienced guy. This is his 5th UFC fight. He's 3-1 thus far, but he's still kind of raw and awkward, and we don't know necessarily who he is as a fighter yet. If you can't acknowledge that Paddy's gotten favorable matchups thus far, you're lying to yourself, right? Luigi Vendramini, guy that hadn't really done a ton in the UFC. Kazula Vargas, a 36-year-old guy that hadn't done anything in the UFC. Paddy goes out, does what you're supposed to do in those instances if you're the heavy favorite. He got tagged in both of those, though. And that's the part that really starts to interest me and starts to pique my interest and get me focused a little more. Because as much as Paddy is a magnetic personality and gravitational pull of charisma, absolutely undeniable. The walkout is going to be amazing again on Saturday. Can't wait for it. Can't wait for the "Oh, Paddy the Batty" chance. Skill-wise, I don't know where he fits. I don't know what the ceiling is. I don't know. I think it's a lot lower than a lot of people think. I don't think he's somebody that's getting anywhere near title contention. I don't know if he gets anywhere near the top 15 in the lightweight division. Like, if you look at that weight class right now, are you picking him to beat anybody in the top 15? Are you picking him to beat some of the other kind of established people in the 16 through 25 range right now even? This is another fight that's winnable, but also challenging. And I think if Paddy's not careful, this can be a fight that screws things up, that really throws a wrench in things. Now, I think he will win. I think he's still getting the victory this weekend. But Jordan Levitt's awkward, as I said, and he's a guy that if you try to just mess around with him on the ground, he might be able to just out-grapple Paddy Pimblett. And that's really the one spot where Paddy is the best, generally speaking. Now, we've seen Paddy throw some good hands and have a little bit of pop. So maybe he goes out there and he lands another knockout and we get another finish that way. But I just want to see, and I just want to start figuring out when this guy's going to start getting truly tested. Because there's only so long that you can bring fighters along. And it's the Michael Venom Page thing in Bellator. We've seen it in the UFC, even with Sean O'Malley. There's only so long you can kind of coddle these fighters and bring them along with favorable matchups where they're beating guys that don't have a big chance of beating them or haven't really done a lot, and they're not advancing in their division before you start to lose some of that audience. Now, I don't think the British fans, and especially the fans in Liverpool, are ever going to abandon Paddy. But fans here in North America aren't necessarily going to just stick around for the ride if this guy's continually fighting people that he should beat and not really getting tested. Light heavyweight bout, Nikita Krylov welcomes Alexander Gustafson back to the UFC. And my question is, what, if anything, does the Mauler bring to the table in 2022? He hasn't fought in 2 years. He hasn't won since May 2017, which was mind-blowing to see and figure out when I put this together. He's 3-6 in his last 9 fights, which dates back to the first fight with John Jones. There's some narrow title losses in there. There's a blowout loss at home to Anthony Johnson. There's another title loss to John Jones, which was an absolute blowout that I know was disheartening. And it's sort of one of those things for me that, like, what is he doing coming back? What's the reason for this? And I'm going to talk to Alex on Wednesday. So by the time you see this, I will have sat down with Alexander Gustafson and had this conversation and asked him this question specifically. Why are you back? What is it that made you decide to come back? And what are the goals and aspirations for you at this point? We hear Dana White say all the time that if you're thinking about retirement, then you should be retired and you should go away. I think there's 2 different elements to that. I think it's reasonable and understandable for athletes at a certain point of their career to look ahead in terms of planning and their life after the sport. I think it's something different if you're questioning whether you should continue to compete. And I think when you walk away because you're just, the love of it is gone, I don't know that the love of it coming back or missing it is enough of a reason for you to come back and step into the cage. Because as much as Nikita Krylov has struggled in recent fights, he's still a dangerous fighter. And if you're anything less than 100% in, he might beat you. And then you're looking at, another loss, and it's 3-7 in your last 10. And what are we doing here? Alex Gustafson was one of the best light heavyweights in the world many, many years ago now. And I'm just not sure whether this is desire and something to prove and dealt with some injuries and had a bunch of stuff on the go that I had to sort out and I needed to take that time away from, or if this is, I want to just see if I still love it. I want to see if I can do it anymore. We're going to find out on Saturday. I apologize for the pause and the cough. Still dealing with the after effects of a little head cold that came through the house here in the last couple of days. But we soldier on. Molly McCann and Hannah Goldie in a flyweight matchup. My question for this one is, will the meatball keep rolling? Pun very much intended. I'm really interested to see how Molly McCann responds now that there's actually some pressure and some attention to her. She went into her fight in March against Luana Carolina. She was coming off a win over Jeon Kim, but there wasn't a ton of focus on her. She was certainly somebody that is a fan favorite that people like, but there weren't expectations. There's expectations now. She had that knockout in March, which is still one of the best knockouts of the year in the UFC. But now people are looking at it, and she is one of the star attractions of this fight card. She's on the main card. I would say that it's her and Paddy Pimblett and Tom Aspinall are the 3 draws of this card in terms of the British audience, in terms of selling this event as a reason to go back to England this quickly. And I'm just curious to see if having that little bit of pressure changes anything for her, changes how she fights, changes the nerves and anxiety she deals with going into the fight, any of those things. Because Hannah Goldie is a beatable fighter. This is a fight that Molly should win. But as I said in my notes, she's also not somebody that you should really fuck around with, right? Emily Whitmire kind of hung out too long last time, leaving her arm in, and got armbarred. And so I'm really interested to see if Molly can avoid being too amped and pressing too hard, trying to recreate that moment against Luana Carolina and sort of recapture some of that moment instead of just going out and fighting and being the best version of herself on Saturday night. Main card opener, Paul Craig versus Volkan Ozdemir in the light heavyweight division. And my question is, why is Paul Craig fighting Volkan Ozdemir? Last time out in March, he defeated Nikita Krylov, who was fighting further up the card against Alexander Gustafson. I'm not really worried about fight card placement and order, as you know, if you've read anything I do, listened to podcasts in the past. I think it's just an arbitrary thing. They get set up the way they get set up, and it doesn't have any definition in terms of, or any reference, I should say, to skill or level of competition or ranking or any of those things. What I do think, though, is like with the number of wins this guy has, and unbeaten in his last 6, with wins over Magomed Ankalaev and Jamal Hill, he's facing a guy on a 2-fight losing streak, and it just doesn't make sense to me. Like, to me, this fits with what I was talking about on Monday's pod. He's got wins over Magomed Ankalaev, who is moving up the ranks. He's got a win over Jamal Hill, who's moving up the ranks. And it just sort of feels to me like, what more does this guy have to do when we've got old heads like Thiago Santos and Anthony Smith, who are still up towards the top of the division, but have already had their turn and failed? How come Paul Craig needs to fight a guy in Volkan Ozdemir, who, yes, fought for championship gold several years ago, but is on a 2-fight losing streak and is in a position where he's just kind of hovering at the bottom of the top 10? Like, why isn't Paul Craig getting an opportunity further up the line? Why isn't he facing someone like Jan Blachowicz or someone in that range? Why isn't he facing Anthony Smith or Thiago Santos? And Thiago Santos isn't even the right pick because he hasn't done a lot lately either. And so I just think this is one of those bookings where the quiet guy from Scotland who's been finishing fools but doesn't have a lot to say otherwise is kind of getting stuck having to go the really slow route, where the wild man from Slovakia, or the Czech Republic, excuse me, got the fast track. Now, I'm not saying they're the same fighter. I'm not saying they're comparable in too many ways. But, right, we see some guys get that hot shot and some guys get bumped into the fast lane. And then other guys get the Paul Craig treatment, the Leon Edwards treatment, whoever it may be. And it just doesn't really make sense to me. I don't think this is a very smart booking. I don't like this booking because if Volkan Ozdemir does win, you kill off Paul Craig for a guy that's already lost to a bunch of the fighters ahead of him in the division. So it doesn't really leave you with much going forward. And I'm always about leaving yourself with a win going forward no matter what, as often as you can. But we'll see how it shakes out. Prelims close out with Mason Jones, versus Ludovic Klein, made sort of short notice. Klein was supposed to fight in August against Ignacio Bahamondes. He was pulled out of the card. Mason Jones stepped in. They moved it ahead to London, and here we go. My question is, will Mason Jones start to make a little run? Jones is a kid that came over to the UFC as a 2-division champion from Cage Warriors with a little bit of buzz, a little bit of momentum. People that had paid attention, obviously, to the European scene and the UK scene knew who he was. And it hasn't been great since. He's got 1 win, he's got 1 loss, and there's 1 no contest. All of them were dog fights. He's taken damage in all of them. The win is over David Onama, who is now at featherweight where he naturally belongs. So that's a little bit like the only guy you've beaten thus far is the guy that took a fight on short notice and fights a division below. So this becomes a test. He's also 27, so it's really kind of time if he's going to make a run, if he's going to start putting together some results that are, you know, get you inspired and get you believing that there's bigger and better and a greater future beyond just being a very serviceable and stalwart kind of fighter. This is where it needs to start happening. It's a chance to fight at home, but it's a tough assignment on relatively short notice. So I do think this fight on Saturday is going to tell us a lot about the Welsh fighter. Similarly, light heavyweight fight, Mark Jacasey, Damir Hadzovic. I have the same question for Mark Jacasey here. Will he make a little run? Now, he's coming off a victory over Slava Borchev earlier this year. He's 29. He's a plus athlete. He's got a good amount of experience. He had a couple little fits and starts to his UFC career, right? Opens with 3 wins, has that Street Fighter combo against Timu Pakalin. Then he loses a few fights. Then he got a couple wins. Lando Venata was in there. Then he had a couple more losses. He got back in the win column last time. The losses are all to good competition. He hasn't lost to any scrubs. This is a chance to get a second straight win. I think Mark Jacasey is a guy that when he was putting together that first winning streak, I know that he moved over to the States. He was at ATT. And I think it was a little premature. I think it was one of those things where he went over thinking he needed to change so many elements of his game or round out so much of his game and learn from different people that it took away from a little bit of what he does best and sort of upset other elements of his life. As much as fighting is his job and is important, I also think there's, a time and a place for decamping from home. And I think Mark is somebody that is better off and does better being at home. I think there's a chance that he can kind of go on a run here. I do think the skill and the talent is there. I think it's been a little bit mental in some of these losses, and prep has been the issue more so than actual talent. But we're going to find out, because Damir Hadžović is a tough, one of those tougher than a $3 steak kind of guys that is going to be in there and just be in your face the whole time, ready to scrap with you, ready to bang with you. Can beat you if you're not at your best. And we're going to see if Marc Jacasey can be at his best for a second straight. We move to the featherweight division. Nathaniel Wood moves up to featherweight for the first time to face Charles Rosa. And my question is, what does the move to featherweight do for the prospect? It's his first fight in a new division. He gets an immediate litmus test against the veteran Rosa, who, for all of his lack of results in terms of consistency and things like that, we know he's a tough out. Even though the record isn't great, we know he's a hard guy to beat. He's going to give you a hard fight. It's going to be in your face, as I said with Hadžović. It's going to be there for you for the 15 minutes and make you work to beat him. I'm really interested to see what Nathaniel Wood looks like in this division, because he's a little small in stature at 5'6", but he's got a solid reach. And I know that the cut to 35 was really difficult, right? It was very hard for him to get down. And that's certainly limiting, as Harry, who is producing this show, often says, fuck weight cutting. It certainly depleted him and limited his ability. Much like Jacasey, his losses are to good fighters, but he hasn't competed in nearly 2 years now. And so the road isn't necessarily easier at featherweight than it is at bantamweight. Both are very difficult divisions to make headway in. And we're sort of at a point with Nathaniel Wood, similar to Mason Jones, where if you're going to go, it's time to start going. If you're going to be a contender, if you're going to move forward into the top 15, it's time to start showing that. It's time to start putting some of these wins together and get going. And Charles Rosa is a guy that you can go and get a good win on. He's a guy that you can go out and beat and will understand and will recognize that that's a good win to start your featherweight career. But he's also a guy that can show that just changing divisions isn't going to solve whatever was ailing you. And so I'm very curious to see what happens on Saturday when these two get in there. Another featherweight fight right behind it, Makwan Amirkhani versus Jonathan Pierce. And my question is, which Amirkhani is going to turn up? For me, he is one of the most frustrating fighters in recent UFC history. My opinion, don't have to agree. But when you can have some of the brilliant performances that he's had, debut way back in the day against Andy Ogle, and his most recent fight against Mike Grundy in London in March, when he comes out and just choked out the Commonwealth wrestler in, I think, under a minute. To also then have some of these duds that he's had, where he's got, 4 minutes of a gas tank, 3 minutes of a gas tank, and nothing else to offer after, is just baffling to me. He's clearly talented, but he's also flaky at times. And now look, there's certainly been some stuff outside of the cage happen for him that we don't know about. Very difficult life in terms of refugee status and things like that over the years, and dealing with family and things like that. All kinds of stuff goes into it. As great as he looked last time, though, we weren't expecting that, because he had lost 3 straight and 4 of 5 before that. He's facing a grappler here on Saturday in Jonathan Pierce, which means his gas tank is going to get tested. So is he going to have enough to go more than that first 5 minutes of scrambling and, mat returns and grappling? Is he going to get Jonathan Pierce out of there in under a minute? Or are we going to see the Amirkhani that didn't have much to offer in some of those fights that he lost. I have no idea what the answer to what answers are going to be presented. This is a complete question mark fight to me because he is an absolute enigma. He is, as Lisa Simpson described Nelson Muntz, an enigma wrapped in a problem, wrapped in a vest. The first time out, it was a purple velvet blazer, and it was lovely. And I'm really curious to see which version of this dude turns up on Saturday. Because if it's the good version, Jonathan Pierce's winning streak is going out the window. But if it's the bad version, Jonathan Pierce is getting a 4th straight victory. Next up, we move to flyweight. Muhammad Makayam versus Charles Johnson. My question is, will the UFC be able to bring Makayam along slowly? The 21-year-old is my fighter to watch this week on the Keyboard Kimura Newsletter. He is an absolute uber prospect. 21, undefeated in his pro and amateur careers combined. Debut win in March against Cody Durden opened the show, 58 seconds, guillotine choke. Like, tons of hype, tons of momentum. But one of those guys that, like, is there a certain point where you have to just go, we need to slow play this and let him have, 4 or 5 fights over the next 2 or 3 years so that he can gain experience and he can be in the gym and he can grow into his body some more and round out his skills some more and progress sort of at a more natural clip. Because if you've heard anything that Mo said going into this or any of his fights, he wants to be fighting for the title within 2 years. He's looking already at the top of the division and saying, I can beat some of these dudes. Let me at them. Let me prove it. I love the moxie. I love the desire. But I also know that hopes and dreams like that get dashed really quickly when you start getting in there against some more experienced fighters. And more importantly, we can see really good young talents broken and then stalled if they do get thrown in too quickly. If it is a case of too much too soon. I think Yair Rodriguez is a good example of that. All that momentum when he first came into the UFC, dominating people, highlight reel performances, and then gets thrown in with Frankie Edgar, and it's just one-way traffic. And it stalled out Yair's career to me for a couple of years because all of a sudden it's just gone and you're questioning yourself and you're not sure and you got to figure out how to get it back. Now, I'm not saying that Makayam is going to have the same fate as Yair Rodriguez. I think he is a supremely talented young fighter with an unlimited upside. But I also know that bringing this along slowly is probably the best course of action. But it's going to be real hard if this kid keeps going out and beating people in a minute and running through competition. Charles Johnson, it may be his UFC debut. He's a good fighter. He's a very good fighter. He's 11-2, LFA champion, successfully defended the belt twice. His only losses are to good competition in Sean Santella and Brandon Royval, who's number 5 in the division right now. Like, this is, if Makayam goes out and looks great, it's going to start getting hard very quickly to not run this guy up the division, to not start putting him in some of those fights that he's looking for, to not give him a chance to face those guys in the lower third of the top 15. But I think the UFC should try as best as they can to really slow play this because they'll get the best results if they do. We move back to lightweight, Jai Herbert and Kyle Nelson. And my question here, and I'm going to try to channel my best Dana White. So allow me to get, a little more red in the face and just say, so you want to be a fucking fighter? Because these two dudes are the epitome of Jesus Christ, things get real hard when you hit the UFC. If depending on how the matches are made. Both of these guys were absolutely fed to the wolves upon their arrival. Two fighters that had good success on the regional circuit. Jai Herbert, a champion in Cage Warriors. Kyle Nelson, champion in some smaller promotions here throughout Canada. Get into the UFC. They come into this one. Both are 1-3. Both got stopped in their first 2 fights. Got a stoppage win of their own and then got stopped again. Jai Herbert last time out in March against Ilya Topuria started well. Got clobbered in the second round. Like, These guys show how difficult it is to excel at this level because they are very talented fighters. If they were anywhere else and matched up against, a bunch of other people, maybe it goes differently. But they got thrown in there against good competition right out of the gate. And not even the best competition in this division, but just good competition, and got smashed. And here they are probably battling for their place on the roster. It should be an exciting fight because both are finishers, but both are also, as I said, prone to being finished. But man, this just shows you how tough it is to have success in this sport, in this promotion. I wish them both luck. I'm never going to come on here and advocate for somebody being let go or not being super UFC caliber or any of that stuff. Like, these two dudes have had a tough road. I want to see them stick around and get to enjoy some success rather than just have the struggles. But their struggles show you that this isn't as easy as you think, and why we should really pay attention when people do come in and have success or do string together lengthy winning streaks, and not take those things for granted, because it's easy to come in and end up being 0-2 and wash out, or 0-3 and wash out. Whereas the loser of this one will be 1-4 and bounced when you were a champion elsewhere. And a guy that before you got to the UFC, everybody was saying this person deserves to be in the UFC. They've done enough that they merit the opportunity to compete on the biggest stage of the sport. And both of them thus far have struggled a great deal. The shit ain't easy, man. And I give kudos and props to everybody that does it. And I think we need to pay more attention and recognize the difficulty of this a lot more often. Victoria Leonardo versus Mandy Baum, second fight of the card. And my question is, does either woman have long-term UFC upside? As I just said, I'm never going to come on here and advocate that somebody doesn't deserve to be in the UFC or anything like that. But I also do want to look and do think it is important that we look at athletes and say, what is the future of them here? Do they have, where can they fit in this organization in their respective divisions? And so both of these ladies are 32 years old with moderate experience and losses to the best competition they've faced. Victoria Leonardo had a good win on the Contender Series to get her opportunity in the UFC, then lost to Meno Fierro and Melissa Gatto, both of those by stoppage in the second round. Gatto was at the end of the second round. She broke her arm, couldn't continue. Mandy Baum dropped a decision to Ariane Lipski in her debut. This kind of feels like a winner stays, losers likely to get bounced kind of situation. But what I want to see is, can the winner of this stick around beyond just winning this fight? Like, are there a couple more wins down the road? Is there development from either of them between these performances that we've seen the last time out? But I also think that both of these women are a good example of why we should pay attention to who you beat and who they beat when we're looking at these athletes, because both had good performance. Like, Leonardo's win over Chelsea Hackett got her this opportunity because people were hyped about Chelsea Hackett, which in retrospect was kind of wild because Chelsea Hackett hasn't fought since and hasn't panned out to be anything near the prospect that people were hyping her up to be. And Victoria Leonardo has struggled at this level. Mandy Baum was undefeated, I believe, coming into her UFC debut, but she had fought people in Europe that hadn't accomplished anything. And so here we are with two fighters that sort of worked their way to the UFC, and now it's about proving they can stay. And we're going to find out on Saturday if either of them can really prove that they're going to have a long-term future in the UFC. Last one, fight card opener. Veteran welterweights Claudio Silva versus Nicholas Dalby. And my question is this Claudio Silva's last stand? Again, not advocating for him to leave, not saying this dude needs to retire, but hear me out. Claudio Silva is 39 years old. He enters on a 2-fight losing streak after an 11-year run where he was unbeaten. He resides in London and has resided in London for a long, long time. Win or lose, this feels like a very good opportunity to me to bow out in front of what will be a partisan crowd. It's a winnable fight. It should be a good battle one way or the other. And I just think that for athletes at certain points of their career, being able to capture a moment and have that moment of walking away be an actual moment is meaningful. For me, if I was in that position, it would certainly mean something. I wouldn't want to just necessarily do it on some random event at the Apex or whatever the case may be, right? If I had the opportunity to do it at home, or I had the opportunity to do it on a big fight card or against a certain opponent, that to me, kind of like, right, we saw Cowboy do it, the fight with Jim Miller. That was the right stage. That was the right opportunity for Cowboy. This feels like a good opportunity if Claudio Silva wants to have that moment where he gets the ovation and gets the send-off and can have it at home. I'm sure there will be lots of friends and family there on Saturday. It can come here. I don't know whether it will. I'm curious to see if it will. If it does, you can reference this to your friend, to, the Twitterverse on Saturday and say, Spencer said this probably was going to happen, or maybe going to happen, or could happen. Sometimes I predict these things. But those are my questions for the second appearance in London of the UFC this year. Appreciate you checking them out. Shout out to my guy, Harry Powell, at BJJ_Harry Powell, for producing this and editing this and putting all of this together and forcing me to do video, because he correctly understands that it is the best way forward going forward. I hope you enjoy it. Let us know in the comment section. As always, hit me up on Twitter, all of that stuff, at Spencer Kyte. We will be back next Wednesday from my dining room table, as I said off the top, as we get ready to get out of here. Move number 28 for me. The season vetted this. We got it all down to a science. Everything is just about packed. Going to go finish doing some now. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next Wednesday. Be good to yourselves. Be good to one another. Take care.